Sturge helped form the Students' Union, and unusually for a female student at Mason College, did not take a London degree, but in 1886 went to London University itself to become an early female medical student there. So she was one of the first pupils at Edgbaston High. She was one of the first students at Mason College. She was one of the first women to take a medical degree at London. While in London, she won many honours, including scholarships. Now, obtaining medical education was a Herculean struggle for most women, as evidence, I've got evidence from across Britain, the USA and Europe. And I use this one, in fact, because one of the few places that did open its doors for medical students, female medical students, was Zurich. But this is a contemporary cartoon from there, and you can see you've got medical students at the top, women how they are at Zurich, and at the bottom how they should be. Sweet and lovely, as of course all women are. New versions of old gendered assumptions were exacerbated even further in any form of science, albeit medicine, of course, was the one area in which women had always been present. I mean, most medical care devolved on women at home. Partial successes, bitter campaigns, amazing stories exemplified the virulent opposition to women becoming doctors, although nurses were acceptable. And some of the arguments against women becoming doctors was that the work was too hard, they had to work at night, they saw naked bodies, but it was all right if they were nurses, because nurses were mainly lower and working class women. It was again a class thing. So not until the 1876 Enabling Act was examination of women for medical qualifications and registration of them as doctors legal in Britain, but the Act was only permissive, so many, many obstacles remained. But Birmingham was ahead of the game, although not without controversy. Since 1869, it had had a training institution for nurses to meet the growing demand for skilled nurses. It also boasted of several hospitals, including 2 teaching hospitals, the Children's Hospital, and from 1871, the Birmingham and Midland Hospital for Women. Since 1867, the Medical School of Queen's College in Birmingham not only educated male medical students, but won an international reputation for biomedicine and clinical research. An all-woman local association campaigned unsuccessfully for women to be admitted in 1873. Among the college's eminent staff, Lawson Tate gave qualified support for a few competent women to become doctors, especially to look after female complaints. I haven't got the whole quotation he gave then, but it's lovely. It's along the ideas, well, there is evidence to show in history that there have been 1 or 2 women whose brains might be equal to men's. And if we had 1 or 2, they might do work that was worthwhile and would help the future. So let them have a chance. They would be a mere drop, he said, in the medical bucket. Now, this was significant since he was appointed junior surgeon at the Women's Hospital and was to make it world famous through his innovative gynecological work. Equally significant was the fact that his most prominent supporters were George Dawson and Joseph Chamberlain. In 1880, Chamberlain, then mayor, led a deputation to the teaching hospitals to allow women in. They resisted, although one partly gave way the following year. Now, the involvement of both Chamberlain and the women in this indicated an important community of people who were to initiate change. Chamberlain's brother Arthur was the prime mover in establishing the Women's Hospital, and like him, worshipped at the Unitarian Church of the Messiah, where the charismatic Henry Croskey not only promulgated the civic gospel initiated by Dawson and taken up by other prominent nonconformists in Birmingham, but he and his wife Hannah made their chapel a centre for women's rights, including the suffrage and higher education. Female members of the extensive Unitarian kingship web were prominent in feminist organisations and social and educational initiatives in the city, like Quakers, seeing them part of a holistic ideal of civic and moral reform. Many of them were associated with the Women's Hospital from the start. Now, if any of you know the present Women's Hospital, which descended from this, looks rather different, but this was the early one. The institution was highly unusual in Victorian times, in constitutionally having to have 50% each of females and males on its committee of management. The Women's Hospital was equally pioneering in appointing a woman resident physician, Dr. Louise Atkins, in 1872 and Edith Pesci in 1875, although despite the Enabling Act of 1876, aspirant women doctors took many more years to be entered onto the British Medical Register. So Birmingham appointed 2 doctors, women doctors in turn, at this particular hospital, who were not yet on the register because they weren't allowed to be. Atkins actually qualified at Zurich University in 1872. Pesci had not been allowed to become fully qualified at Edinburgh, but 1876-7 did so at Bern. How did they get onto the register eventually? They went to Ireland. The Irish College of Physicians decided in 1877 that they would make use of the Enabling Act and they would register women who had managed to get foreign degrees in medicine. And so they went to Ireland and got their degrees. They both not their degrees, sorry, they got on the British Register because the British Register recognised people who were recognised by the Irish Register. So both these 2 women had considerable medical careers. Although neither stayed long in Birmingham, the Women's Hospital gave them a start where most hospitals refused to train, let alone employ women. The board also pioneered the appointment of women pharmacists. Birmingham had more female pharmacists ahead of other places right up until the Second World War, and appointed other women doctors, including Annie Barker and the Quaker Annie Clark. This is the only picture I could find of her. She was actually a cousin of Maida Sturge, who from 1883 to 1904 was also on the staff of the Children's Hospital. In 1881, the Committee of the Women's Hospital asserted proudly, "This is the only hospital in the country where honorary acting staff includes ladies as well as gentlemen. The committee believes that whatever may be felt as to the desirability of the general adoption of the medical profession by women, no one who has seen the working of this institution can doubt the propriety of their assistance in respect to the peculiar ailments of their own sex." Now they are ahead of the game, but they are appointing women to treat women. So they haven't got quite as far as they want them to treat men yet. Children, yes, boys were all right. So, in 1905, the board appointed Maida Sturge. She had qualified in 1891 and started her professional life as a doctor, a resident medical director at the Clapham Maternity Hospital in London, moving from there for 4 years to be resident medical officer of the North Eastern Fever Hospital. In 1894, she addressed the London School of Medicine for Women, the prime institution in the whole country for helping women to become doctors, urging the high calling of medicine as a profession for women. She returned to Birmingham in 1895 to take up general practice, but from 1898 to 1905, she also took over the administration of, and anaesthetics, nearly didn't say that, at the Women's Hospital. A task made easier by the respect earned by its first permanent female doctor, Annie Clark, who had risen to be the most senior member of staff by November 1897. From 1905, Sturge was acting honorary surgeon at the hospital, becoming honorary consulting surgeon when she retired because of ill health in 1924. As Sturge promoted her belief in the value of sleep, sunshine and fresh air in the treatment of illness, perhaps not sounding so amazing, but she was very much a believer in preventative medical care and did all her best to promote that. Evidently, from all the things I've read about her, this was a woman of boundless energy, untiring, resourceful, sometimes formidable. I don't think she suffered fools gladly, yet extremely generous to all. When she died, people were saying a poor person come along would come along and didn't have clothes to wear. She'd take clothes off her own back to give them. She was a very generous person. She was not only physician at the Women's Hospital for 19 years, but from June 1913 was honorary secretary of the medical board for 11, a post in which she wielded considerable influence. Her greatest contribution to the hospital has been claimed to be her work with women who were terminally ill, including her initiative and enterprise in establishing the Taylor Memorial Home of Rest for older terminally ill women. And you have to remember, a lot of these women would be in circumstances where their homes might not be the best place for them to be when they were very ill. Even so, her successful private practice, which included more affluent patients, such as the children of the extensive Cadbury family, was also a significant part of her working life. She appears to have been a much beloved doctor, judging by the letters and testimonials written about her when she died. As such, she became part of a growing community of women medics in Birmingham, a community enlarged in the early 20th century by the growing number of female doctors and nurses in the burgeoning educational services. But, as welfare started for children in schools, so you get female doctors in Birmingham being appointed to look after. There were men as well, but there were a lot of women. That women were so strongly represented in this owed much not only to women from the liberal elite who served on the Birmingham Education Committee and its subcommittees which made the appointments, but also to the qualified women who'd studied science in the high and grammar schools, Mason College, and from 1900, the new University of Birmingham, the first provincial university to admit men and women equally to their medical faculty. Within this community, Mary Sturge strove for better conditions for nurses and women doctors alike. I haven't got time to go into it, but she did a lot. She thought nurses were very much undervalued, underpaid and overworked. Like her Aunt Eliza, she was also a doughty fighter for women's rights, becoming an active member of the Birmingham Women's Suffrage Society. She joined the small but growing Association of Registered Medical Women in 1891 and was an early member of its successor, the Medical Women's Federation, established in 1917 to fight discrimination against women doctors. For example, they weren't allowed to serve the troops in the First World War. So they went off and helped the French and the Serbians instead. And she became president 1920 to 1922. As such, she sought to claim a larger role for medical women in public health, including such matters as infant welfare, venereal disease, child education and birth control. Well respected as a doctor, Sturge also became known for her strong advocacy of temperance. This stemmed not only from her Quaker family concerns, but also because of her early experience as a doctor in London. Her 1907 co-authored book, Alcohol and the Human Body, sold 85,000 copies in Britain and the USA and went into 6 editions. She lectured all over the country on this, using her medical knowledge to back her cause. And that was something that someone like her, she could say, I am a doctor, I am speaking from medical professional experience. In and after the First World War, she was also much involved in peace and refugee